Welcome to the book summary of Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, a timeless guide about the silent force that can either destroy us or help us rise. The ego. This isn't a book about arrogance. It's about awareness, the quiet self-deception that whispers, "You already know enough." Ego isn't confidence. It's the mask we wear when we're afraid of being seen without one. Holiday begins with a truth that hits hard. Before every fall, there's ego. Before every failure, there's blindness born from pride. The ego feeds on validation. It craves recognition more than growth. It tells us we're special, when in reality, we're still learning. And that's where the journey begins, between what we are and what we think we are. Every person who has ever achieved greatness had to wrestle with this inner voice, the one that says, "You've made it." But true mastery comes when we silence that voice and replace it with humility. Ego wants applause. Purpose wants progress. The greatest leaders, artists, and thinkers in history learned this distinction early, because when you stop chasing praise, you start chasing truth. Ryan Holiday draws from history, from Stoics, soldiers, philosophers, and innovators, to remind us that the most dangerous enemy is not out there, it's inside. The ego destroys silently. It makes us defensive when corrected. It blinds us to feedback. It convinces us that learning is beneath us. But the truth? Every stage of success demands a new level of humility. When you're beginning, ego tells you to prove yourself. When you succeed, ego tells you to show off. When you fail, ego tells you to blame others. The book teaches that ego doesn't disappear once, it must be defeated daily, because ego isn't an event, it's a pattern. A pattern that thrives on attention and dies in silence. Holiday invites us to imagine the ego as a shadow. It's always there, but it only grows darker when we stand in our own spotlight. If you want to grow, you have to step out of that light. True greatness doesn't announce itself. It acts quietly, consistently, purposefully. The ego seeks to impress. Humility seeks to improve. This is why the best never stop learning. They remain students no matter how high they climb. Holiday reminds us, impressing people is utterly different from being impressive. Ego makes you chase validation. Purpose makes you chase vision. The first drains you. The second fulfills you. In your early stages, ego will whisper that you're ready for recognition. But what you truly need is preparation, because recognition without foundation crumbles under pressure. History is full of people who rose fast and fell faster. Not because they lacked talent, but because ego made them believe they'd already arrived. The humble, however, build slowly, brick by brick. They care less about being seen and more about being solid. They learn from mentors, admit mistakes, and grow quietly while the world sleeps. And when their moment comes, they're ready. Not for fame, but for impact. Holiday divides life into 3 battles. Aspire, succeed, fail. Ego attacks you in all 3. In aspirations, it says you're already better than others. In success, it says you deserve this forever. In failure, it says it's not your fault. If you can defeat ego in all 3, you master yourself. Because life isn't a race against others, it's a race against your own illusions. One of the book's most powerful lessons is to stay a student. Even when you think you've learned everything, life has a way of humbling you. The moment you stop learning, you start declining. That's why humility isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Ego wants certainty. Humility wants curiosity. The people who grow fastest are those who admit how little they know. Because every "I don't know" opens a door that ego would have kept shut. Think of great minds. Socrates, Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, all were defined not by pride, but by wonder. They didn't say, "I'm brilliant." They said, "Teach me more." That's why they never stopped evolving. Ego tries to protect you from discomfort, but discomfort is where growth happens. When you let go of the need to be right, you make room to be better. Holiday writes that we must talk less, do more. Ego loves to speak. Humility loves to act. In the age of social media, this message hits even harder. We mistake visibility for value. But posting is not progress. Talking is not doing. True power comes from work done in silence, work that doesn't need an audience. Ego says, "Look at me." Purpose says, look at the work. When you focus on the process instead of the praise, you build lasting excellence. Because the applause fades, but the work remains. Holiday challenges us to fall in love with the grind, the unseen hours that no one claps for. That's where ego dies and greatness begins. When you learn to do things for their own sake, not for approval, you unlock freedom. Freedom from judgment, freedom from comparison, freedom from the endless chase for recognition. That's the quiet joy of humility. You no longer need validation to feel valuable. The ego makes you chase everything outside of you. Humility helps you build everything within you. And the strongest foundation you'll ever stand on is inner peace. When you're grounded in humility, no criticism can shake you, and no praise can inflate you. That's real strength. Because the one who can't be swayed by ego can't be controlled by the world. Ego is loud, humility whispers. And in that quiet whisper lies wisdom, focus, and peace. When ego drives, we rush. When purpose drives, we move with clarity. Holiday reminds us that ego wants everything. Right now, it can't wait. It wants recognition before it's earned. But greatness grows slowly. Like a tree, its roots deepen long before anyone sees its height. Ego obsesses over visibility. Humility obsesses over growth. If you want to last, build depth before you build display. Because fame without foundation is like a tower built on sand. One strong wind, and it's gone. True mastery is quiet. It doesn't need to be announced. It's visible in the work, not in the words. Holiday writes, "The greatest work is often done when no one is watching. That's where the real test begins, not when eyes are on you, but when no one would notice if you quit. Do you still show up then? Do you still give your best when no applause follows? If you do, ego loses its grip. Ego feeds on validation, but purpose feeds on discipline. And discipline is built in silence, in the lonely hours of unseen effort. The people we admire most, the calm, grounded, powerful ones, are those who learn to keep their ego in check. They trade arrogance for awareness. They trade noise for stillness, because stillness is power. When you can stay calm amidst chaos, focused amidst distraction, and humble amidst praise, that's when ego bows down. Holiday urges us to remember, you are not your success. You are not your failure either. Both are moments, not identities. Ego tries to trap you in labels: winner, loser, genius, mistake. But humility frees you to grow beyond them. Every victory should make you more grateful, not more prideful. Because pride stops progress. Gratitude multiplies it. Ego says, I did this. Humility says, I learned from this. And in that small shift lies transformation. Ryan Holiday shares stories of history's greats, generals, athletes, inventors, who fell because their ego outgrew their discipline. Julius Caesar lost friends to pride. Howard Hughes lost his mind to it. They didn't lose to enemies. They lost to themselves, because ego blinds you to your own fragility. It makes you think you can't fall until you do. But the humble, they stay vigilant. They know success can vanish. They know failure can teach. They know learning never ends. That's why they keep evolving while others get stuck proving. Ego wants to be something. Humility wants to become something. The difference is everything. Holiday explains, ego inflates identity. Humility refines it. The more you cling to how special you are, the harder it is to change. That's why ego kills growth, because it tells you you're already there. But life is a journey, not a pedestal. There's always another level, another lesson, another layer of understanding, ... Ego hates patience, but patience is where mastery lives. When you slow down enough to listen, observe, and learn, you move faster in the long run. Because while ego races for validation, humility invests in evolution. And evolution always wins over ego. Holiday invites us to redefine success, not as fame or titles, but as continued learning and inner balance. True success is when peace grows faster than your pride. Ego says, I need more. Humility says, I am enough. The moment you realize that, the chase ends, and real creation begins. Because ego creates from insecurity. Purpose creates from abundance. The best artists, leaders, and creators don't compete. They contribute. Their goal isn't to outshine others, it's to serve through excellence. And in that service, they find fulfillment that ego could never offer. Ego wants attention. Purpose wants alignment. When your work aligns with your values, you stop caring about the spotlight. You realize the work itself is the reward. That's when you reach what Holiday calls the quiet confidence. It's not loud. It's not performative. It's the kind of power that moves mountains without shouting. When you walk in that energy, people feel it. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. Your presence speaks for you. Because ego demands recognition, but authenticity commands respect. Holiday says it's impossible to learn what you think you already know. That line alone could save years of wasted pride. The ego hates teachers, but the wise seek them. The ego wants to win arguments, but the wise want to win understanding. If you can choose learning over pride, even when it stings, you'll grow faster than those still defending their egos. Growth demands surrender. Surrender to feedback. Surrender to failure. Surrender to change. That surrender isn't weakness, it's evolution. Because the stronger your ego, the weaker your adaptability. And in a world that's constantly shifting, adaptability is survival. Holiday reminds us that ego isolates. It builds walls instead of bridges. But humility connects. It builds trust, loyalty, and collaboration. The people who go furthest in life aren't those who shout the loudest. They're the ones others love to work with. Because confidence without ego creates safety. And people follow safety, not superiority. When your energy says, "I'm here to grow with you," others open up. That's influence. That's leadership. Leadership is not about standing above others. It's about standing beside them, with enough humility to listen and enough courage to guide. And ego has no place there. Because where ego exists, empathy disappears. But where empathy thrives, influence expands. Holiday teaches us that ego blinds, but humility illuminates. When you put your ego aside, you see people clearly. Their needs, their fears, their humanity. That's what turns ordinary people into extraordinary leaders. They lead not by pride, but by purpose, and purpose is magnetic. The ego commands, purpose inspires. One demands obedience. The other invites greatness. When you lead with humility, you don't need to push people, they choose to follow. Because humility speaks the language of the soul. It reminds people that greatness isn't about being above others. It's about being your best, for others. Ego whispers, "You've arrived." But humility reminds you, you're just getting started. That's the mindset of the masters. They never stop learning. They never stop refining. Because to them, the journey is the reward. Holiday tells us that true greatness is not built on arrogance, but on service. It's built by those who show up, stay grounded, and stay kind, even when success tempts them to forget where they began. Ego inflates the self. Service dissolves it. And when you dissolve ego, you make room for growth, for love, for collaboration. The ego says, "I'm better than them." The humble say, "I can learn from them." That's how you keep rising, not by comparison, but by curiosity. Every person you meet knows something you don't. Every setback reveals something you need. When you start seeing life as a classroom, not a competition, you begin to transcend the ego. Holiday shares stories of great leaders who learned this the hard way. Ulysses Grant, who rose, fell, and rose again, learned that pride could blind even the most brilliant strategist. His failures taught him humility, and humility made him wise. Because failure doesn't break you. Ego does. Failure clears the fog of arrogance and shows you what's real. It strips away illusions and forces you to face yourself. The raw, unfiltered version beneath the titles, achievements, and applause. That moment of reckoning is sacred. Because when you lose everything ego built, you rediscover what purpose needs. Holiday writes, "When you remove ego, you're left with what's real. And what's real is always stronger than what's inflated." So many chase validation, yet forget that validation is temporary. Today's applause is tomorrow's silence. But character, that echoes forever. The truly great ones. The timeless ones don't chase trends. They build truths. They don't perform for approval. They live for meaning. Ego asks, how can I be seen? Purpose asks, how can I serve? And those two questions will lead you down completely different lives. The first leaves you empty. The second fills you endlessly. Because when you serve something greater than yourself, you stop fearing loss. You stop needing constant recognition. You start living from wholeness, not hunger. Holiday shows us that ego thrives on insecurity. It's the armor we wear to hide our fear of inadequacy. But when you let go of ego, you realize you never needed that armor. You were enough all along. So that's when you finally find peace, not from achievement, but from acceptance. Acceptance of who you are, where you are, and how far you've come. And from that peace comes true power. Quiet, grounded, unshakable power. Power not over others, but over yourself. Holiday reminds us that ego is the ultimate illusion. It tells you that you need to prove something, when in truth, you only need to become something. You don't need to impress. You need to express. You don't need to control. You need to contribute. Because the ego's voice is loud, but your soul's purpose is deeper. To hear it, you must get quiet. You must silence the constant need for validation and tune into your inner truth. The calm knowing that says you're here to grow, not to show. When you start creating from that space, your work gains weight. People feel the authenticity in every word, every gesture, every act. You no longer chase applause. It finds you. Because energy rooted in purpose always finds its audience. Holiday says the most dangerous phase in any journey isn't the beginning, it's success. Because success feeds ego, and ego blinds vision. Many fall not at failure, but at the height of triumph. When they believe they're untouchable, that's when humility becomes your greatest safeguard. Humility keeps you adaptable, alert, and grounded in reality. It reminds you that fortune can change, that fame fades, and that the real measure of greatness is not applause but endurance. The humble endure. The arrogant explode. The humble build empires that last. The proud build castles of sand. Because ego builds for the moment, but humility builds for the ages. In every great story, there's a turning point where pride meets consequence. And those who survive that turning point are the ones who choose humility over denial. They listen, learn, and rebuild stronger than before. Ego says, I can't fail. Humility says, I can grow. Failure doesn't end the story. It refines the character. That's why Holiday says the battle against ego is never one you win once. It's a lifetime practice. Every day you must choose awareness over arrogance, purpose over pride. Because ego doesn't die, it waits. It waits for your success, your validation, your comfort. That's when it whispers again, you've made it. You don't need to learn anymore. But the wise smile and say, I'm still a student. Always a student. That's the mindset that keeps you free. Free from comparison, from judgment, from the endless chase to prove. Because when you live as a student of life, the world opens up. Lessons appear in every failure. Wisdom blooms in every challenge. Peace flows through every step. That's when ego can't touch you, because you've risen above it. Holiday says the antidote to ego is gratitude. Gratitude dissolves pride. Gratitude keeps you humble. When you focus on what you have, not what you lack, the ego starves. You stop needing to outshine others. You start appreciating the light within them. That's real maturity. To admire without envy. To lead without arrogance. To win without pride. Because the goal is not to conquer others. The goal is to conquer yourself. Ego builds walls. Humility builds bridges. Ego isolates. Gratitude connects. The people who live fullest lives are those who never let success harden their hearts. They remain soft, open, and kind, even in power, because softness is not weakness. It's strength under control. It's what makes others feel safe in your presence. Holiday writes that when ego fades, love expands. And love for people, for purpose, for growth, is the true energy of greatness. When you act from love instead of ego, you stop fighting the world and start flowing with it. You stop demanding and start creating. You stop shouting and start shining. That's how greatness quietly changes the world. Not through noise, but through presence. Not through dominance, but through direction. And that direction always begins within. In the end, ego isn't the enemy out there, it's the enemy within. The silent voice that says you're more important than the mission. The subtle whisper that seeks validation more than truth. But the wise warrior knows that the hardest battle is always internal. You don't defeat ego once, you discipline it daily. Every success tests your humility. Every failure tests your resilience. And your response to both defines your character. Holiday teaches that the strongest people aren't the ones who win the loudest, but the ones who stay centered in silence. They build quietly, they lead gently, they love deeply, because they understand. Control over the self is the highest victory. Ego seeks control over others. Wisdom seeks control over self. And when you master yourself, no circumstance can unbalance you. You move with calm authority. You act without the need to impress. You create without the fear of judgment. That's freedom. The freedom from the illusion of ego. Ego is a cage dressed like a crown. It looks like power, but it traps you in endless comparison. But humility is liberation. When you stop pretending to know everything, you open yourself to infinite growth. When you stop proving, you start improving. That's the paradox of greatness. The less you chase status, the more magnetic you become. Because authenticity is irresistible. People trust those who are honest about who they are, flaws and all. The ones who admit, "I don't know yet," often end up knowing the most. The ones who say, "I'm still learning," never stop evolving. That humility is the soil where wisdom grows. Holiday shows that ego craves perfection, but humility honors progress. You don't need to be flawless, you just need to keep becoming. The best people in any field are not the loudest. They're the most consistent. They wake up every day and do the work, regardless of praise or doubt, because the goal isn't applause, it's alignment. When your daily actions match your deeper purpose, peace follows naturally. Ego lives in extremes. It's either overconfident or insecure, but humility lives in balance. It's steady, adaptable, aware. It knows that you can be proud of your progress without being blind to your flaws. That's real strength. Confidence anchored in self-awareness. The ego says, "I've made it." The humble say, "I'm grateful to still be here." That gratitude keeps your energy clean, your vision clear, your relationships real. Because ego burns bridges. Humility builds them. And in the long run, bridges matter more than battles. The people who leave the greatest legacy are not those who shouted their greatness, but those who quietly elevated others. They gave, they taught, they inspired, and in doing so, they transcended ego entirely. Holiday tells us that the path forward is simple, but not easy. Stay a student. Serve something larger than yourself. And never let success harden your heart. Because the moment you think you're above others, you fall below your potential. Ego traps you in the illusion of superiority. Humility lifts you into the reality of purpose. When you walk through life knowing that every person, every moment, every challenge has something to teach, you become unstoppable. You stop needing to win every argument. You start wanting to understand. You stop needing to be admired. You start wanting to make an impact. And that shift changes everything. Because the greatest leaders don't say, "Look at me." They say, "Look at what we can build together." Ego divides, purpose unites. The world doesn't need more loud voices. It needs more grounded souls. Souls who know their worth without needing to prove it. Souls who build from love, not pride. That's how you win without ego. That's how you lead without losing yourself. Holiday's message echoes through every story, every lesson, every word. The world will test your ego at every stage. At the beginning, when you crave recognition. At the peak, when you believe you deserve it. And in the fall, when you're tempted to blame others. But those who stay humble rise again, because humility gives you something ego never will: resilience. The ability to begin again without shame. The ability to learn again without pride. The ability to lead again without dominance. That's what true mastery looks like. A quiet, unshakable peace that no failure or success can disturb. Holiday reminds us that ego isn't evil, it's just misplaced energy. Energy that can either build walls or build wisdom. When you redirect that energy toward growth, creativity, and contribution, it becomes power in its purest form. The kind of power that inspires, not intimidates. The kind of power that lifts, not crushes. The kind of power that changes lives, including your own. So every time ego whispers, prove them wrong, let humility answer, I'll just keep improving. Every time ego says you deserve more, let gratitude say, I already have enough. Every time ego demands control, let surrender remind you, peace is found in letting go. That's how you win the only battle that truly matters, the one within. Because when you master the inner war, the outer world falls into place. Ego loses, awareness wins, and peace becomes your natural state. Holiday ends with a reminder. Your legacy won't be measured by how much attention you gathered, but by how much light you shared. Let your humility be your greatness. Let your silence be your strength. Let your growth be your glory. Because in a world that worships ego, humility will always be revolutionary. And now, we've reached the end of this cinematic summary of Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. If this message resonated with you, if it sparked something calm, powerful, and real within, subscribe for more cinematic book breakdowns that help you grow, rise, and lead with quiet strength. Thank you for listening. And remember, the greatest victory you'll ever win is the one against yourself.